let me paint a picture for you. It's the faraway year of 2019, and I'm sitting in the office, trying to avoid doing work. And what do you do when you're trying to avoid work? Do some Reddit archaeology, aka going to a subreddit and sorting by top of all time, just to catch a glimpse of what this community is all about. For whatever reason, I ended up on the anime subreddit, and would you know it? I stumbled upon some old drama about whether a certain music video was considered anime or not, despite being developed by a Japanese studio in the land of the rising sun and premiering in Shibuya. But apparently, you need an IQ of 180 and a PhD in Nihongo to answer that question, so I'll leave it to smarter minds to figure out. Naturally, I watched the video to see what the fuss was all about, and I was hooked. While the music video was certainly special, it was the track itself that reeled me in. That sense of melancholy while still being upbeat and vibrant? Ugh, inject that shit straight into my veins. The brainchild of Porter Robinson and Madeon, I devoured both of their discographies. On Porter's side, there were Spitfire and Worlds, as well as the self-titled Virtual Self under the same alias, while on Madeon's side there was Adventure, alongside a slew of singles and remixes from both artists. It wasn't enough. I watched remakes of their tours, found alternate renditions of my favorite songs, and scoured the internet for IDs before, finally, searching for similar artists just to repeat the entire process with. Despite all of that, I needed more. Lo and behold, my prayers were answered, and Madeon graced us with a new single. I had the track on repeat for days, and still, I craved more. I needed some outlet for my excitement. But what exactly? And that's when it hit me. I could go see Madeon live. It sounds dumb as hell, like, duh, you can see artists perform. But I didn't follow artists growing up. I listened to whatever was on the radio, and back then, the radio comprised mostly of singles, whereas nowadays it seems to be mostly comprised of ads. Anyways, it wasn't until I had gotten a bit older and music streaming had become more popular that I started to check out individual artists. It was also around this time that I was looking for tickets that my friends mentioned wanting to plan a trip together, and pro tip, if you've always wanted to travel or are having a hard time deciding where, give yourself an excuse to go anywhere and plan your trip around that. So with 6 tickets to Good Faith Live in hand, off we went to Portland, Oregon, and that's where I fell in love with Good Faith. Good Faith opens with the ethereal Dream, 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 welcome you in with a stop and start chant that lends to the song's otherworldliness. An early vocal chop, however, reminds you that despite the gospel influence, this is still an electronic album and not your grandma's usual church hymns. As the melody progresses, the vocals gradually kick in with the lyrics being what I can only interpret as Madeon professing his continued love for music. We also catch a glimpse into some hidden trauma, and how it was ultimately music that allowed him to get back on his feet again. We shift into All My Friends, which begins with a set of piano keys that builds into an infectious electropop banger, with a chorus that'll have you singing alongside the grooving bass line. Though we could choose to assume that the track title refers to his literal friends, here, I feel that friends are code for Madeon's audience, his fans. And so when Madeon sings about all his friends watching and all his friends talking, he speaks to the pressure of having to answer to one's fanbase. This pressure, no doubt amplified by the fact that it had been nearly half a decade since his previous album. I specifically bring up Adventure here because if we circle back to the trauma that was alluded to on the previous track, then that bit of knowledge combined with All My Friends gives the album some much needed context. Adventure was met with critical acclaim upon release, and is still a beloved album for many to this day. With such a positive reception, the expectation of course was that his sophomore album would be something bigger, something even better, and Madeon may have internalized that, resulting in some form of writer's block that he had to overcome in the process of creating Good Faith. Realizing all that is when Good Faith's story truly began to take shape for me. The personal tale of a man falling out of love with his craft, maybe even to the point of dreading it, but trying to rekindle that passion once more. We then have Be Fine, which starts with this repetitive piano note before hitting us with a melodic shouting that instantly draws you in. The vocal chops that follow are also mystically pleasing in that they're the type to sound suspiciously close to actual words, despite being just vocal chops and nothing more. And yet, my lizard brain can't help but try to assign meaning to them. Where some hear no faith, no fuss, or no us, I choose to hear no friends, mainly because it fits the narrative I've built for myself, but I digress. Compared to the previous track, Be Fine is much slower, with an underlying kick-clap pattern that controls the momentum. The steadiness provided by the pattern also does much to aid in the song's overall theme of resolving oneself to approach music once more. One thing I want to bring attention to is the lack of percussion during the first chorus. The minimal instrumentation makes this passage seem lighter, more innocent, like a child consoling themselves after sustaining an injury on the playground. In comparison to the second instance of the chorus where percussion is present, the same passage now feels a bit more full, a bit more mature, like an adult stating plainly that they will be fine, commanding even. Not just, I'll be fine, but I will be fine, if that makes any sense. And I know I already mentioned the shouting, but I just want to say it again. I love the shouting refrains on this track, especially towards the end as they become more frequent and grow in power. Nirvana is the first in a pair of songs that, in my opinion, should have been a single track, but more on that later. Though consisting of only 3 distinct lines, those 3 lines are all that is necessary to convey the song's message. The first line has Madeon stating music as being where he belongs, while the second has him acknowledging the difficulty of the creativity process. Despite the aforementioned difficulties, though, the last line is him expressing a willingness to step up to the challenge. This theming resonates especially deep for me because if you've ever taken on a creative endeavor, whether that be writing a book, developing a game, or storyboarding a YouTube video, then you'll understand exactly what it is he speaks of. The mental anguish, the doubt, the self-loathing. Despite all of that, you still feel this inexplicable need to create. Aiding the sparse lyrics is an instrumentation that climbs in tension throughout the track, with each section building upon the last. Low droning gives way to a crescendo of cymbals and bass, which itself leads into a frantic hi-hat beat and synth passage before finally ending the song with a rising drum section. I mean, who does that? Ending the song with what appears to be the lead up to a drop? But from Nirvana, we bleed naturally into Mania, a transition so seamless that upon my first few listens, I actually thought they were a single song. To this day, the 2 tracks are coupled so tightly together in my mind that when I have my playlist on shuffle, it simply feels wrong to hear Mania without the build-up of Nirvana, and Nirvana without the pounding drums of Mania. Nirvana is the only song to contain no lyrics, but none are required as the track speaks perfectly well for itself. The opening drum that I can only describe as the spawn of both a bass drum and taiko give off this intense, tribal feel that immediately makes me think of going into battle. The passages that follow also call forth visions of traveling through a desolate wasteland, hacking through your enemies as a sandstorm batters your worn and beaten body. All in all, an explosive piece that has Madeon inviting you into his headspace to feel a fraction of the arduous struggle he goes through while producing music. With the buildup of Nirvana, and the climax that is Mania, then what must follow, of course, is the following action, a release of tension, and for that, we have Miracle. The track begins calm, with Madeon musing about the many different paths in life he could have taken, and what others would have liked him to become. But as we've seen from previous tracks, he simply cannot resist the allure of music. Knowing that they are unable to change his mind, the difficulties of such a career, and that passion alone doesn't necessarily translate into financial success, they ask a single question: can you show me a miracle? He reflects on the sacrifices he's made along the way in the process of pursuing his dream, having had to leave them behind, his family, his friends, his homeland. And his answer? A triumphant vocal chop at the 1-minute mark, complete with crashing cymbals and rolling drums. Yes, I can show you a miracle. The humming vocals and plucky strings bring a certain level of contentment, washing over the listener with a wave of satisfaction and tranquility, as if Madeon were doing a victory lap, arms spread wide to show you all that he has done, all that he has accomplished, and who he is. The themes of pursuing music as a career continue in No Fear No More, as Madeon begins the song with a verse reminiscent of the pre-choruses in Porter Robinson's Musician. And while I would love to talk more about Nurture, Nurture is deserving of an entire video on its own, so you'll have to forgive me for leaving it at that. Unlike the previous track that focused on whether or not music as a career was the correct decision, this track has Madeon coming into his own, having fully accepted his decision and gaining confidence in his choice as he squashes any remaining doubt. The kick-clap pattern playing throughout the entire song exudes this very confidence and lends the track a strong feeling of sureness. Also aiding in the feeling of confidence is the second instance of the chorus where Madeon's vocals are backed by the West Los Angeles Children's Choir. This extra layer of depth gives off the impression that there are people rallying behind him and supporting him. As for the squashing of doubt, This is best illustrated in the passage immediately following the second chorus, where we have the lyrics suddenly cut off, like an intrusive thought being pushed aside. And when that same intrusive thought tries to creep back in a second time, it's met with the titular, "No fear, no more." In my mind, Good Faith can loosely be broken into 3 acts. The first 3 songs have Madeon resolving himself to approach music once more, while the next 4 have him diving headfirst back into music and contemplating whether this was the correct decision. As for the last 3, they are a reflection of his time with music. Starting with Hold Me Just Because, the tracks that follow are noticeably slower than the previous half a dozen that have thus far leaned much heavier into the electropop sphere Madeon is so well known for. And while these tracks won't have me going crazy on the dance floor, in the vacuum of this album, it makes perfect sense to slow down the pacing in order to better capture that essence of reflection. Madeon contemplates that he doesn't think he'll ever be able to leave music, going so far as to reference the fact that he's been creating music ever since he was a child. However, the lyrics do beg the question, who or what is holding him? Taken all together, I get the vague feeling that this may be in reference to his past style. While Good Faith contains many elements that are recognizable of Madeon, it does represent a departure from his previous album as he attempts a more soulful, more personal sound. The simple fact is, in the 5 years since, he's changed, and with it, his sound palette. And as much as he cherishes his older material and style, he must bid it farewell if he ever wishes to evolve his sound and take his music in new and interesting directions. But rather than mark the death of his previous self with tearful string instruments or sorrowful piano solos, he chooses to send off his previous self in celebration through an accompaniment of blaring horns in the song's outro. Having completed his goodbyes, Madeon continues to examine his relationship with music in Heavy with Hoping, where he compares it to an unrequited love. To blindly follow and devote all of one's energy into something without ever knowing that there will be some payoff takes an enormous amount of faith. Am I on the right track? Am I doing the right thing? And so he personifies music throughout the track to pose those very questions, first asking, but then pleading towards the end as he becomes more desperate for an answer that will never come. And then finally, we have Borealis to wrap up both his reflections and the album. Here, Madeon touches upon what he ultimately hopes to get out of creating music, and that's to leave behind a legacy, long after his death. Once again, horns are brought into the ensemble, this time softly throughout the entire track as they help to usher in the album's finale. And call me paranoid, but the whining synth lines are reminiscent of something you might find on a Daft Punk track. The final lyrics are sung halfway throughout the track, giving way to the instrumentation as Madeon allows it to speak for itself one last time. And as the song gradually fades, so too does the album. So there you have it, how I've interpreted Good Faith and why I love the album so much. Aside from the sonic aesthetics that make it such an immediate joy to listen to, it's the deeper narrative that I don't often get from many electronic records. To be able to delve into Madeon's headspace and his relationship with music, it adds an extra layer on top of an already superb album. And I understand that my interpretation of the album could be completely wrong. Perhaps the love he expresses on tracks like Hold Me Just Because are in fact for a real-life human being, and not some personification of music. But that's the beauty of the medium. With no easily accessible, surface-level story like, say, a movie, a certain amount of effort is demanded from the listener in order to fully engage with the work, and that opens up the possibility of multiple, but equally valid interpretations. But wait a second, but bonus round! The world first caught a glimpse of The Prince in its entirety during Porter Robinson's 2020 Secret Sky Festival, and it was officially released a few months later. Originally meant to be included as a part of the album, it was eventually left off due to being thematically too dark. And we can see why. The gospel influences and vibrant undertones that we've seen throughout the entire album are absent. In its place, we have a heavy bass line and a more forlorn style of singing that help to generate the aforementioned dark and brooding atmosphere. Thematically, the song speaks toward taking control of your future and being the maker of your own life. This theming alongside the extensive usage of percussion make me feel that the track could have had a place alongside Nirvana and Mania, albeit with some level of modification in order to ensure flow. Though noticeably for an album that has thus far been devoid of any samples, The Prince does appear to contain the vocal component of the Think break from Lynn Collins' Think About It, so perhaps that had something to do with the track being left off as well. Continuing the Good Faith era is another track that was originally intended to be on the album, Love You Back. A light-hearted affair with smooth vocals, the lyrics tell the tale of an unrequited love. But whereas most tracks have the singer experiencing unrequited love towards some unknown recipient, The script here is flipped, with the singer being on the receiving end, and most of all, unable to return those same feelings. The synth line that begins around the 45-second mark and continues to reoccur throughout the track adds this extra sense of longing, as if to show the other side's desperation in wanting to make things work. And perhaps the most bittersweet part is that the singer does genuinely care about this person, doing their best to encourage them to let go and move on, giving us the impression of a tender but highly complex relationship. In the context of the album, we could theoretically apply the same themes, such as Madeon being so enamored with music and the personification of music being unable to return his love because, well, it's a non-physical entity, but the track was removed from the album for a reason, so I'm not as ready to accept this as my headcanon. And finally, for real this time, we have Gonna Be Good. I'll state up front now that I vastly preferred the live edit to the original version, and when the track was first released, I was beyond disappointed to find the bridge missing. Without it, the track felt like it simply petered out into nothing. Something about that bridge is just magical, and then the callback to You're On? Absolutely amazing. A dose of nostalgia but in good faith fashion, while giving us what truly feels like the end of an era. But going back to the original and its meaning for a moment, the track reminds me of Be Fine in that we have someone stating how the future will be. Unlike Be Fine though, where the song is tinged with an undercurrent of uncertainty and struggle, Gonna Be Good feels more hopeful. This is partly due to our meta-knowledge that this is the final track of the good faith era, but mostly due to the language used that conjures images of creating a future, as opposed to needing to overcome hardship to reach a goal. Gonna Be Good is by far my favorite track of the good faith era. It just feels so optimistic, and I highly recommend watching Madeon's performance of it at the Brooklyn Mirage. I don't often get jealous, but my god do I feel like I missed out. It's safe to say that Good Faith occupies a special place in my heart. Not only do I love the album, but it sparked a new part of my life as well. After seeing Madeon live at the end of 2019, I made it a goal of seeing at least 5 shows in 2020. Surely nothing of particular note would ever happen that would prevent me from doing so. I haven't even touched on the visual aesthetics of Good Faith, as designed by Madeon and the architects. Though I've tried to keep this video to purely about the album and the story it tells without relying on external information, Good Faith Live is an experience in itself and has completely spoiled me when it comes to visuals at a live show. It boggles my mind that there are still artists out there that simply throw up their logo. I get that not everyone has the money, skill set, or even desire, but so much missed opportunity to further express themselves in their music. I'm lucky enough to have been able to see Madeon 4 times now. Once for Good Faith, another for Good Faith Forever, and twice for DJ sets. For Good Faith Forever, a friend and I actually drove to the next state over and back in the same night. The next day at work was miserable, but god was it worth it. My only regret is that both times, we caught him during the early stages of his tour, and missed out on all the cool ways the show evolved over time. But alas. If I am successful, then this video will have come out before Madeon's final performance of Good Faith, as he brings this chapter to a close. Though I'm saddened to see it end, I can't wait to see what he has in store for us, and I'll be there for when he returns. How long has it been? 6 months? 7 months? Crazy how time flies when you're an adult. Though admittedly, I've been enamored with Baldur's Gate 3 and Phantom Liberty, so it hasn't been just life. I probably should have paid more attention when I was being forced to learn piano and trumpet growing up because, as I wrote the script, I struggled to find the words to articulate my thoughts. I have the utmost respect for musicians, being able to weave story and emotion using a universal language understood by all parts of the world. Though fun and challenging in a good way, it'll probably be quite a while before I dive into another album this deeply. More importantly, what I've learned from creating this video is that I need to avoid open-ended scripts that balloon in scope, and so I'll try focusing on shorter videos in the near future. Assuming there is a next at least. Until then, see ya!